Boy in Darkness by Mervyn Peake. Episode 5. Even the formidable muscles of Hyena were tested by such a climb, but he was now no more than a dozen feet from the subterranean floor, where every sound was amplified and echoes shuffled from wall to wall. The boy was no longer in a faint. His head had cleared, but his hunger was keener than ever, and his limbs felt like water. Once or twice he had raised himself a little from the shoulders of the half-beast, but had fallen back again for lack of strength, though the mane upon which he fell was, for all the oiling that Hyena gave it, as coarse and thick as tear-grass. Directly he landed, he turned from the swinging chain and fixed his eyes upon the outer wall of the vault. Had he gazed up at the throat of the ancient mine-shaft, he would have seen, for his eyes were as keen as an eagle's, a pin-prick in the darkness, the colour of blood. It was all that could be seen at the sunset, that grain of crimson. But Hyena was not interested in staring up at crimson pinheads, but in the fact that he was now within 100 feet of the lamb. He knew that even his breathing was overheard by his inscrutable lord, and he was about to take his first step forward when there was a sudden trampling to his left, and a dusty creature in a black coat slewed itself into the picture and only drew up when it was within a yard of its irritable colleague. For it was, of course, the goat, the dusty-headed goat, who had, to Hyena's amazement, a grin upon his face. A real grin, and no mere show of teeth. It was not long before he knew the reason. And had it not been that every sound that was made was loud in the lamb's ear, there is no doubt the goat would have been savaged mercilessly, if not killed, by the merciless Hyena. For, during the last part of the goat's solitary flight through the galleries and girders, an idea had come to him, born of his hatred for Hyena, who had so callously stolen from him the golden chance of pleasing the lamb. Hyena, though unaware of the meaning of the goat's grin, yet knew no good could come of its implications, whatever they were, and he shook with suppressed rage as he glared murderously at his mulcted foe. Unshouldering himself of the boy, who slid to the ground, the Hyena, using the language of the deaf and dumb, for the faintest whisper would have sounded to the lamb like the cracking and hissing of a forest fire, made rapid signs to the goat, which told that he proposed at the earliest opportunity to hack him to death. In return, the goat, who mouthed his words syllable by syllable with his purplish lips, advised his enemy with a horrid oath to do no such thing, and then, to Hyena's amazement, turned away, and, facing the outer walls of the sanctum, lifted his mealy voice. "Lord Emperor and ever-dazzling lamb," he said, "O thou by whom we live and breathe and are, son of our nether darkness, listen to your slave, for I have found him." There was a sudden wrenching sound, as of strangulation, as the Hyena, lifting his long, mean head, strained, as it were, on an invisible leash. His blood had mounted into his head, and his eyes shone with a red light. There was no sound from the lamb, so the goat continued. "I found him for you on the dusty plains. There I subdued him, brought him to his knees, drew from his belt his dagger, threw it away to where it sank in dust as a stone sinks in water, trussed him and brought him to the mine-head. There, longing in the sun, I found Hyena, the muscular Hyena, the foul Hyena." "Lies! Lies, you slavering knobhead! All lies, my lord! He never even—" There came out of the gloom a gentle bleating, a sound sweet as April.
"Be quiet, children. Where is this human youth?"
As Hyena was about to tell the lamb that the boy was lying at his feet, the goat whipped in with his answer. "We have him, sir, prone on the earth floor. I suggest that he is fed, given water, and then allowed to sleep. I shall prepare my bed for him if you agree. Hyena's couch is foul with filthy bristles and hairs from his striped arms, and white with powder from the bones he munches. He could not keep in such a place as that, nor has Hyena any bread to give him. He is so bestial, my ivory lord, so unspeakably vile." But the goat had gone too far, and found himself at once upon his back. Over him loomed the trembling, febrile and muscular darkness of Hyena. His jaws, opening to their fullest, disclosed a crimson world walled in with teeth, which, as they were about to close in with a crack like gunfire, were held quivering in mid-air by that flute-like voice again, for the lamb was calling.
Bring me the youth that I may touch his temple. Is he unconscious?
The hyena knelt down upon his knees and stared at the boy. Then he touched his head. He had not recovered from the fabrications of the goat, nor from the uprush of anger he had just sustained. The boy, who was wide awake, felt a kind of extra sickness, and knew intuitively that above all he must pretend at this moment to be unconscious or to be dead, and as the goat bent over to inspect him, he held his breath for 20 long seconds. The proximity of the goat was frightful to endure, but at last the creature rose and called out softly in the gloom, "Insensible, O lamb, insensible as my horny hoof."
Then bring him to me, my pretty wranglers, and forget your puny rage. It is not you or the sound of you that interests me, but the human youth. I am very old, and so can sense the youth of him against me, and I am very young, so I can sense his nearness to my soul. Bring him to me now before you wash him, dress him, and give him food and sleep. Bring him to me, for my finger itches.
And then suddenly there came from the throat of the lamb a cry so shrill that had the hyena or the goat been looking at the boy, they could not have failed to see him start where he lay, as though someone had pierced him with a needle. It was a cry so excruciatingly shrill and so unexpected that the goat and hyena drew closer together for all their hatred of one another. They had never, down the long decades, ever heard their lord throw out such a sound. It was as though, in spite of his grasp upon himself, the lamb was yet unable to control the emotional pressure that filled his milk-white body. And so this jet of sound sprang through the darkness. It was a long while before the high-pitched echoes died away, and the yawning silence returned. But it was not only that the sound had been shrill and sudden, there had been something else about it. It was no mere matter of the lungs or the vocal cords. It sprang from the uttermost pit of evil, a spearhead, a lance, a forerunner of dire menace. All that the lamb had hidden for long centuries had shrilled its way through darkness into light. But the lamb was outwardly the same, and sat, if anything, more upright than ever. The only difference being that the little snow-white hands were no longer folded. They were raised to the height of the shoulders in a gesture almost of a supplicant or of a mother holding an invisible child. The index fingers, curving a little inward, suggested, however, some kind of beckoning. The head was bent back a little on the shoulders and looked as though it might strike forward at any moment, like a cobra. The veiled eyes, in their dull blue opacity, appeared almost to see through the membrane. The hyena and the goat came forward, supporting the boy by his elbows. Step by step they drew nearer to the lamb until they came to the wall that surrounded the innermost sanctum, and when they were only a few feet from the heavy curtains that formed the entrance, they heard a sound of bleating, so faint, so far away. It was like innocence or a strain of love from the pastures of sweet April. That was the sound they knew, the goat and the hyena, and they shuddered, for it brought with it no more love that can be found in a vampire's tongue.
"Once I have run my finger down his brow,"
came the soft voice,
"and slid it down the profile to the chin, then take him from me, feed him, and sleep him. I can smell his fatigue. If either or both of you should lose him in the mines,"
continued the voice as sweet as honey and as light as birdsong,
"I will make you eat each other."
Under his mane the hyena turned as white as the bones he gnawed, and the goat heaved with a sudden abortive sickness.
"Come in, my dears, and bring your treasure with you."
"I come, master," cried the gruff voice of Hyena. "I come, O my emperor!" "I have found him for you," echoed the goat, not to be outdone, and as they pushed their way through the curtains, the boy, unable to resist the temptation, opened his eyelids the merest fraction and stared through his eyelashes. It was only for a moment, and his eyes closed again, but he had seen in that short space of time that the abode of the white lamb was lit by many candles.
"Why do you keep me waiting, gentlemen?"
The unnaturally sweet accents flowed from above, for the chair in which the lamb sat was a tall, sculptured affair, a good deal higher than is usual.
"Must I tell you to lie upon your backs and suffer? Now then, where is he? Bring me the mortal."
It was then that the boy went through his darkest hell of all. The long ache of his body, acute as it was yet forgotten or disposed of in some way, for he was filled with a disembodied pain, an illness so penetrating, so horrible, that had he been given the opportunity to die, he would have taken it. No normal sensation could find a way through this overpowering nausea of the soul that filled him, for he was getting nearer and nearer to an icy aura that hung about the face of the lamb, an aura like death, gelid and ghastly, yet febrile also, and terrible in its vitality. Yet all was contained and held between the outlines of the long, inscrutable visage. For even when the lamb had screamed, the face remained immobile, as though the head and the voice were strangers to one another. This long face with its vibrance and its icy emanations was now very close to the boy, who did not dare to raise his eyes, though he knew the lamb was sightless. Then came the moment when the little finger of the lamb's left hand moved forward like a short, white caterpillar, and, hovering just a little while near the victim's forehead, finally descended, and the boy felt a touch on his brow that brought his heart into his throat. For the finger of the lamb appeared to suck at the temple like the sucker of an octopus, and then as the digit traced the profile, it left behind it from the hairline to the chin a track or wake so cold that his brow contracted with pain. And that was enough, that tracing, to teach the lamb all that he wished to know. In one sweep of the finger he had discovered that he had in the darkness before him a thing of quality, a thing of youth and style, something of pride, of a mortal unbeasted. The effect upon the innermost system of the lamb must have been horrible indeed, for though there appeared to be no visible excitement in the way he got to his feet and raised his blind face to the darkness overhead, yet at that moment, when he moved his finger from the boy's chin, a kind of covetous and fiery rash spread out beneath the wool, so that the milk-white curls appeared to be curdled in a blush from head to feet.
"Take him away at once,"
he whispered.
"and when this coma leaves him, and when he is fed and strong again, return him to me, for he is what your white lord has awaited. His fiery bones cry for realignment, his flesh to be reshaped, his heart to be shriveled, and his soul to feed on fear."
The lamb was still standing. He raised his arms on either side like an oracle. His hands fluttered at the extremities of his arms like little white doves.
"Take him away, prepare a feast, forget nothing. My crown, the golden cutlery, the poison bottles and the fumes, the wreaths of ivy and the bloody joints, the chains, the bowl of nettles, the spices, the baskets of fresh grass, the skulls and spines, the ribs and shoulder blades. Forget nothing, or by the blindness of my sockets, I will have your hearts out. Take him away."
Without waiting a moment, Hyena and the goat backed clumsily out of the candle-lit vault, and the heavy curtains fell back heavily into place. As usual after a session with their ghastly lord, the two half-beasts clung together for a little while after the swinging back of the curtains, and the presence of their dank bodies was almost more than the boy could stand, for he was wedged between them. Their internecine feud was by now forgotten in the fearful excitement, for they were to be witnesses of transformation. Together they put the boy to bed, if a mouldering couch can be called a bed, and they fed him from an old tin of mashed-up bread and water. There was something almost lovable in the way they watched him lift his head to the wooden spoon. Their concentration was so childlike. For a moment before the boy fell asleep, he gazed up at the two strange nurses, and there flashed through his mind the thought that, if it need be, he could outwit them both. Then he turned over and collapsed into a thick and dreamless sleep, while the goat, sitting beside him, scratched interminably at his dusty head, while the hyena, an ulna between his jaws, munched away in the darkness.